You know that thing that happens when people from your different worlds come into contact and those worlds collide? That happens frequently and happily with December. So I was excited when we got a submission from Jen Logan Meyer, who I've known for long enough that I don't really know exactly how I know her. I hadn't seen her in a long time, but I was excited to see that she'd taken up creative writing and was even more excited about what she had sent, which was a group of flash fiction pieces, all based on a single exquisite photograph by Heather Bennett. Well, I was excited, but I was also disappointed. The photograph was in color, and it wouldn't have looked so great as a black and white, but our printing technicalities mean we have to print color in 8-page blocks. Do you have any more like these? I asked Jen. No, not right now, she said. I asked if we could hang on to the fiction photo combination for a little while. I liked it too much to part with it, but I had to figure out exactly what to do with it. I'll tell you how we resolved it when we come to our next reader. But in the meantime, you should know that Jen Logan Meyer directs the Professional Practices Program for the College of Art at Washington University and is an MFA candidate in fiction at Bennington College, one of the first and most rigorous low residency MFA programs in the country. If I had to make a list of writers to watch, she'd be at the top. It's my pleasure to welcome Jen Logan Meyer.
So much, and to Buzz, if he's arrived, and to Jennifer Goldring and the rest of the December staff, I'm delighted and honored to be a contributor. I'm so glad to begin with Anniversaries, which is a piece, as Gianna mentioned, was written in response to this work by my dear friend and colleague, Heather Bennett. And it was featured this last spring in the ekphrastic portfolio that Gianna had hinted at. Ekphrasis, it's kind of a clunky word, means description in Greek and completely new to me, but it's very traditionally poetic responses, of poetry in response to visual work. And so I insist what I'm about to read are not poems, they're texts, but I hesitate to call them stories because they don't follow a traditional arc. But what they are 4 possibilities for the subject of Heather's work, and they are exactly 50 words each, in response to the inexactness of this image, which it's unclear exactly what's going on, but maybe all is not what it seems. Anniversaries. Miriam, 20 years, all Duchess satin and miniature calla lilies back then. Cake. Tonight, the nylon thing doesn't beckon as Sheila at Filene's said it would. A silence, loud and clear, amplified by the Chesterfield. Then a broken coupe, Tattinger everywhere. Still you are. Black and white, and you sit. Liza, eating blueberries from Mackinac when the Bower boy appeared at the back door about the accident. 10 years and tickets to Rigoletto to stop remembering. Left before the sound of the oboe playbill read. Blended whiskey, then you sang nothing. The flute broken in weird places. Gilda was her name. Hillary. Smoothing cummerbund, then hands on my head, floorboards hard, so very hard on my knees. To the bar cart, the tumbler tumbles as I tell you. Peach chiffon, now a gin stain. Is that what that is? You never knew that 8 years ago played lacrosse and was named Harold. Martha. You were in Dusseldorf and sometimes with me in Menemsha. So much this day ago that soon you would not remember which door opens or closes what, or when Frankie's birthday is, or that highball is not trying to hurt you. Dr. Burke, you really had no idea. So these next couple fit into the category, as Gianna mentioned, to microfiction, and so this was my attempt to get at one whole life in under 1,200 words. So let's see, a house of women. Nora was born to a house of women. It was a rotting Victorian that slumped in the Oklahoma heat, its turrets and spires tired and feeble, the wrought iron trim brittle and corroded, its leaded and latticed windows clouded and yellow like the cataracts that had fogged Mary Catherine's eyes. A mother named Sarah, an aunt named Miriam, a grandmother named Mary Catherine, and Hazel, another aunt, both great. They were tired, like the house. When they couldn't sleep, they wandered the stairwells and corridors in pale silk robes, faces aglow, night blooming like the primrose and gardenias that lined the overgrown beds near the gazebo. She was a tiny, squirmy thing, and knowing that Nora's mother knew how or why she had happened there, she had slid out into a night hot and still, except for the tiny white bugs swirling around in the midsummer haze, fuzzy and floating around the gaslights like the blown seed heads of many dandelions. Though the windows stood open, the mayflies did not enter this house of women. Coated with bluey vernix and bright red blood, Nora landed on a quilt made of pieces of calico dresses of all the girls that had come before. There were no questions, just arms and hands that reached out to fix, hold, watch, wrap, and cover. Hushed voices that carried out into the window and dissolved with the white bugs into the night. There had been men before, and there would be some still, but they would not stay long. Some of the men had died. Miriam's man had been a fiancé who was killed by mustard gas, shot into the crowded trenches in the north of France. Red spots in the throat and on white faces erupted in blisters that took days to kill. Many weeks after reading the telegram, Miriam received a chocolate pot made of paper-thin porcelain, so white it was almost blue. Its flourishes crept up like ivy in the color of Jordan almonds. 6 matching cups and saucers trimmed in gold, and a note that began, "My darling Miriam." It came in a straw-lined wooden crate from Brussels that was eventually brought up to the attic where it remained. Sometimes, Miriam would go to the attic and take handfuls of straw back to her bedroom to fold into her pillowcase. When Nora was 6 years old, she contracted scarlet fever, so the house of women was quarantined. A notice in heavy black type printed on red paper was posted to the front door. Bread, salt pork, and cheese wrapped in brown paper, glass bottles of milk, and a burlap sack of string beans and potatoes were left in wire baskets on the side porch. Nora spent 3 weeks shivering on the divan, wrapped in a blanket made of calico dresses. The women in the house took turns at her side. Miriam spooned canned fruit cocktail from one of the porcelain chocolate cups into Nora's red mouth. When Nora was in high school, she learned to needlepoint and to whip egg whites in the blue tin bowl for meringue or for angel food cake, the same one that her grandmother would feed her when she was a baby, crushed with the tines of a fork, softened with fresh cream. Nora would read in the living room by the oil lamp while her mother sat beside her, letting out the hem of the dress. Shadows were cast from the cameos that hung on the wall that elongated and distorted them. Sometimes the women would go to another house in August, up north by a lake. It was white clapboard and its green shutters rattled when there was wind. There, Nora met a man at a supper club who wore tall, polished boots and could recite lines from Donne and Keats. Nora married this man, they had 3 girls, and every Thanksgiving or in the spring they would visit the House of Women. Arms and hands reached out and held. Mary Catherine, withered by now, would bring the girls melted toast with butter and jam on a silver tray. Hazel would later show them the storm cellar and its own little kettle. They would bring down their dolls to play house. Years later, Nora would live in another House of Women, as the man who wore shiny boots and knew Donne and Keats had left her for another man who knew different poets. Mary Catherine died. The girls helped to make thumbprint cookies and cheese straws and brewed tea for the reception after the service. They were taller and started to chew gum, and and look at magazines, so they no longer brought their dolls when they came to this house of women. Hazel brought out the big jewelry box for the girls to look through, and they huddled on the rug in the living room. The women in the house, Nora, Miriam, Sarah, Hazel, sat on the divan and watched them, waiting to identify clip-ons that were worn to a dance in the church hall, a brooch once worn on a felt coat, and a bracelet, though missing a few charms, still sparkled. This was one that had been worn on a wrist as it waved on the platform of the depot, a man on a train leaving the station who returned the wave, but who did not return. Nora's girls grew up, they went to liberal arts colleges, had June weddings, and children of their own. Hazel finally died, and Miriam's body was in a home, though her mind was elsewhere, leaving just Sarah in what was that house of women. Once, when Nora came to visit, she thought of asking about her father for the first time. She sat beside her mother on the divan and covered her legs with an afghan she had found in the linen closet. She looked for the quilt made of calico dresses and then remembered that the girls had left it in the house up north, and then when they returned the following summer, it couldn't be found. Nora looked at her mother's profile as she looked out the picture window. Her shoulders were rounded, and she could not walk on her own. The shape of her was sharp and strong, eclipsing the last light of day as it entered the house. Nora decided she did not need to know. When Sarah died, Nora sold her own house and moved into the house where she was born. Her girls and their children would visit often and bring tomatoes and mint snipped from window boxes surrounding other houses. One of her girls' children would eventually bring a baby and would place the wriggly thing in bed next to Nora so she could whisper softly to it. Nora had returned to this house of women where the women within lived and loved, and on one midsummer night, a night that was hot and still, she found something like many arms and hands on her arms and hands. Turning to a window, an open window that was open to the night with no moon and no breeze, she lifted her arms to hold in return.